Hi everyone, Uldaman here, back again with another video. In this video, I kind of want to take a look at the different Dragonflight dungeons because I can't be the only one who thinks they are a little meh. I'll highlight my thoughts and opinions about the different dungeons, but what actually inspired this video is the fact that in the next season, 10.2, we actually won't be getting any Dragonflight dungeons in our Mythic dungeon pool. It will only be old dungeons. And I was honestly a little bit surprised, but my initial response was that thank God. I really don't. Again, I want to preface this by a bad WoW dungeon, and I don't even think any of the Dragonflight dungeons are really bad. Are still really good dungeons overall when you look and other MMOs. WoW does dungeons absolutely amazing, but specifically with Dragonflight, I feel like there has been some misses that I want to talk about. So let's get right into it. So I will start off with looking into the dungeons that we had last season, and the first one I really want to talk about is Ruby Life Pool. Now, I think Ruby Life Pool is kind of controversial. I honestly think it would have been a fan favorite if it wasn't so grossly overtuned. If you weren't around for season 1 or you don't remember, this dungeon was notorious for being a few key levels harder than everything else. And specifically the second area, the ring, when you get up there upstairs, those mobs that was around there was extremely dangerous. And as I mentioned before, grossly overtuned. You would almost get one-shotted by having one cast at you. Now it did eventually get fixed, so I don't really want to take tuning into this necessarily. Just know that it was definitely a pain in the first weeks and the first month, I think, of the season. It did get better. Now, Ruby Life Pool actually did have a really great start, in my opinion. I think it's a dungeon is just generally really great if you can just go in and just pull really relatively big and actually use all your cooldowns, and Ruby Life Pool offered that with that big rock guy, and then you could take a few extra packs into it. And I also really enjoyed the mini boss, especially when you moved him into manipulated his placement, and you moved him around the corner, and you could stand there and just dodge the it's not really anything hugely interesting for the mini boss, but I am actually personally quite favor of mini bosses. I think they are cool and everything, but yeah, so I think the start of Ruby Life Pool was actually pretty strong. Now the first boss was a complete, in my opinion, snore. Nothing really interesting happens. You dodge some stuff, and then you move out with the big circle, and then there's ads, and then you just repeat. And again, with the tuning, it was a really on Tyrannical, it was a terrible boss fight, but mechanically there wasn't anything interesting really to do. It was basically just, can you survive? Can you not be one shot, and can you actually dodge the different things, and then you basically did it. And then after the first boss, we go up in the circle, which I mentioned before was really dangerous. But besides the tuning, I like the idea here. I see why it makes sense. It sounds like a good idea that you you see the second boss, which I actually think is a great boss. Talking mostly from a tank perspective, because mostly it is a tank fight. But the seeing her was really cool, and it's oh wow, okay, little teaser, and you move around the circle, and and you clear out the packs, and you unlock the boss. And I actually think that's great and all, but why do we have to fight the same pack though? That's really what I don't quite understood. I think it could have been an interesting idea if it was 4 different packs. Or there was just some variation to them, but these are just identical. Well, at least no, they are actually identical. You just have a few patrolling packs going into it that variates it. But this is I don't like fighting the same pack over and over again, and that's basically what the ring upstairs felt like. It felt like you're just dragging along, and you just just fighting the same packs. It's boring. It definitely did make this dungeon feel way more repetitive than I actually think it would have been. Now, another thing I think was a really great idea on the paper, but then actually in practice was kind of is the different dragons that was flying around. Now, these dragons were usually fine to fight, again, it was these like mini bosses, and they were really challenging, especially in Fortified. But I think they were fun. But there were like a lot of frustration, specifically with like how they were flying around and when they would land, because it always felt like 9 out of 10 times you would come in at this like awkward time where he just is about to like fly off, or he's like already in the air. So he's just like, okay, do we just stand around for a few seconds? That always feels really wrong when you're like timed. Or like, so you like wait around for him to like, you know, land and like come down, but then you also just fighting this singular mob, which felt again a little bit strange. Or you move on and you maybe even you try to skip him, but then like, yeah, it is possible to skip him, but like in pucking, in my own personal experience, someone always ninja pulled, well, not ninja pulled, but pulled, sorry. Someone always didn't move like further up that they had to, and then the dragon gets pulled and then goes into, and it turns the whole thing into like a shit show. So I think when like it comes to these, specifically like Mythic Plus, you really want to like plan out things, like, especially like with like routing and stuff like that, and it really helps and makes it less of a frustration where you could just know where the enemies are, and like, you know, you don't have a mob that's like weirdly timed of like when it's gonna land and when you can actually interact with it, or like where it is, you know. Or we should have had more options. I think maybe had like one, like only one dragon, because you had two, but only have one dragon, and maybe it was changed on week to week. I think that's fine. And then you had more options to pull it in, because it was really just the fire dragon that was like the frustration part, you know. So funny enough, Azure Vaults was probably the dungeon I hated the most when we were just like in the first week of Dragonflight, when all we could do was playing heroic. As soon as Mythic Plus, oh yeah, because I hated it because it was extremely long, and I also felt like thematically it was just a lot of blues and purples all the way through. It didn't really wow me in any ways. But going into Mythic Plus, that dungeon actually turned out to be my so far, I think my all-time favorite of the Dragonflight dungeons. And the reason for this actually hasn't anything to do with a singular pack or like individual boss or anything like that. Like, no, all of its bosses and mechanics in here are pretty, it's okay, it's good, it's fine. There's nothing really like, you know, terrible at all, but I think everything at least is like, you know, on average like pretty nice. The thing that works so well in this dungeon, in my opinion, is here's a clear example of how you're getting rewarded for being or playing aggressive. And by playing aggressive, I of course mean that you like pull more than you maybe in like at first would be comfortable with. And I don't know if you remember this, but like back in season 1, of course there were some tuning issues. Azure Vault was definitely, but it did get fixed relatively quick. But people still struggled with the timer of it. People thought that the timer was too short, you know, that it was like such a long dungeon, and it was. Even if no one died and you had great DPS, it would still take a long time just to go through the dungeon. And I struggled with that myself, but it actually turns out, super interestingly, that you are kind of forced to like push really hard and like pull really aggressively and pull these extra packs, because there are actually just a few kicks in each pack that you need to deal with. Sometimes only just like one. And having them like locked down, actually without like outside of those kicks or like those stops that you need to do, like if there isn't actually that much danger to it. And as soon as you found out that, you could really go ham in this dungeon, and it was so much fun just to chain pull and pull things into each other where you were like, oh my god, this is really gonna go bad, but you actually always figured out how to go through it. And that was actually how you managed to go like through the dungeon. It was so much fun. So again, doesn't really have a singular pull or a boss that I like really want to highlight, but it's just the overall tempo and the overall like aggressiveness of this dungeon makes it, in my opinion, like one of my favorites. I would say though that like for clear negatives, it is again a little bit long. I think they could maybe have cut off a boss. And also like the second to last area where there's those frogs that like jumps around. It always just is annoying when things are not gathered and you can't really gather them and they just on their own just flying around. That was like always a little bit like annoying, but I think everything else works really well in this dungeon. I think this is gonna be a controversial one because I am actually not the biggest fan of Nokhud, which I kinda have the impression that a lot of people actually are. Now on paper, this dungeon should actually really work for me. It has incredibly big pulls, like, you know, and you can play really aggressive, and also it's a really open dungeon. Like there are extra packs in almost all of the areas where you can just take some extra in one area if you want and then skip in the next one, or you can do it like other way around. There is like room to, you know, actually make your own route here for your own personal preferences. So, and like on paper, this dungeon should definitely, you know, really work for me. Now, actually in reality, so first of like, I think a lot of DPSers really love Nokhud because it's a lot of like different mobs, so you can really pop off in it. Same way you can in like Brackenhide. But as a tank, and this might also be a little bit like, you know, tuning back then that like has a bias here, but it was really not that fun. You would just get absolutely smacked around as a tank, just out of like nowhere. It felt like, you know, a lot of the damage didn't really came from there. I mean, of course it is from like casts and stuff, but like you also just took so much physical like attacks. And a lot of like, you know, cleaves and frontals, and like there's a bunch of stuff that goes off here, and it just, again, it really just was not the, I guess, not the consistency of it. Like it just felt like that sometimes you were absolutely fine, and then you go into the next pull and then you're just getting smacked around, and it didn't really feel like you had much control over it. You could only basically react to it, you know, rather than actually be proactive and actually like mitigate it before it happened. Well, of course you could, like, and that's like what people did, but it's just the impression, like, you know, that it left off as. And I think the biggest problem with this dungeon was dragon riding. And I really don't want to say, like, give up the wrong impression here, because I absolutely love that dragon riding is a part of this dungeon. I'm not sure that this version is enough, or is like the right amount. And what I mean by that is, it's quite clear, and like, you know, give credit to Blizzard, like dragon riding is a completely new thing to WoW. Like, you know, in theory people might like have hated it, you know, and I feel like that's kind of like what you can feel here. There's a little bit like hesitance to use dragon riding. It's basically just plain dragon riding, which is fun for like the first month, I think, when I played the dungeon. But now when dragon riding kind of has been a common norm, yeah, it's quite clear that if Blizzard wants to implement dragon riding into their dungeons and raids, and we will have it coming up in the next raid, which I think is great, they do need to introduce some more mechanics to it. Because what for me it did right now is actually just, it really ruined the tempo of the dungeon. And that's something I really noticed when, you know, you're playing a tank. There is a certain rhythm or tempo, there's certain, like, you know, speed that you're going at, and having to stop and go in your mount and then going around, and then you're really fast for a moment, but then you just land and then you slow again. Like there's some weird, like, you really fast and really slow and you hold back. Yeah, it's just, I'm not sure that this is like the implementation that was like, it felt really basic, and I would wanted like to see some more, at least like going into the future with this. So Academy was definitely also a fan favorite. It's a really fun dungeon, and it is a dungeon that has like really great pulls, big pulls, and it also has a pretty good tempo going into it. I think what's most memorable is probably at the tree boss, where you just pulled everything, and then you found out really quickly if your group were able to finish this dungeon or not. And I honestly want to point this out as a positive, because it is really nice to, you don't have to waste your time. You just immediately figure out if you're going to do it or not. And if you've wiped at that first poll, then you would just see some of your party members leave and, back into queue really quickly. But it was a really fun Now, the boss itself wasn't actually that super interesting in my opinion. It was a pressure point. It was definitely something a lot of people struggle with, but as soon as you figured out that all you had to do was just stack when the ads were spawning, or like, you know, right before the ads were spawning, and then also if you just, specifically in Tyrannical, if you saved your cooldown from Bloodlust for the second ad phase, that's the one where they actually immediately spawn up. You were all fine. This boss would absolutely fall over. Which kind of is frustrating because as soon as you figure that out and then you have go into a pocket run and you have players who just are not stacking and are not saving their cooldowns, they don't have the damage for that phase, it can really, like, you know, wipe the whole party, to be honest. And that's what I don't really like. I like when people make mistakes and it might get harder for the other players, but it don't just cause an instant like wipe of that. But overall, I didn't really think any of the bosses were, you know, extremely exciting, except for one. And that was the bird boss. And this is absolutely just because I was playing a tank. Because when I was playing this on DPS, I actually, again, didn't really care that much about this boss. But the bird boss on tank was really interesting because that was I was playing a protection warrior. And one of our biggest weaknesses are abilities that we can't block and things that are like constantly, you know, causing us damage. So bleeds, and the bird boss had such a nasty bleed, but I tried it on other tanks, and while they could like deal with it better, they were also struggling. This was like a tank buster that forced, just the same way as like Ruby Life Pool, it really forced you to use your damage mitigation abilities much better and like much more precise, which I really enjoyed. The whole filling the arena with a lot of like the wind and the, you know, the fire warps, the swirlies that are coming. I mean, I get it, and I get that it's supposed to make me feel overwhelmed with all of it. I just don't really know if I enjoy that element of it, to be honest. I mean, I did like that you could kind of like, you know, do it yourself, so you decide when this is gonna come and everything. But yeah, no. Besides, you know, actually like forcing you to use your defensive cool bits, like really fit. Also, this boss wasn't really that interesting, and I think that's like the heart of Academy. It had some really great pulls, and like, I mean, like packs and mobs. It was really great at like having big pulls. But the bosses specifically was just really bland and meh. Like they were difficult and they required a lot of healing and they did a lot of damage, but there weren't any like interesting mechanics, in my opinion at least. Now with all those done, I want to move into the new season and the dungeons that we are playing like right now. And the first one I really want to talk about is Neltharus. Now I actually have a lot of complaints about Neltharus. First of all, it's extremely long. It really does not need to be this long. So I honestly, in my, like, you know, if I was Blizzard and if I was like a game developer, I would cut the last boss and just make the forgery, the forge man, the blacksmith, whatever his name was, like him being the last boss. I think thematically, it was a really great setting of like, you can hear the hammer clinking, you know, as you get closer and closer. That would have worked perfectly as like a final boss. And then I think, you know, it just being like just those 3 bosses would just have been like, you know, better. I think it's too long in my opinion. And I think besides having a lot of like passive, but like what is actually making it feel like much longer than it actually necessarily is, it's just also like visually, it's really boring. And that's not really fair to say because it is amazing looking the first couple of times you're in there. But like, it's the same color pattern the whole way through. Nothing really changes. And you just gotta get tired of it extremely fast. And when you are tired of it, then it becomes a really dragging and long dungeon to get through. So I think visually, it has actually had a huge impact of the dungeon. And if you look at the gameplay wise, I'm not really a huge fan of their like, you know, outsized sources that are doing all your damage. I basically don't like the chains, is what I'm trying to say. It feels kind of cheap just to press a button and drag a chain, and you just kill everything inside, and it's like, oh, okay, you have 3-minute cooldown, and you can do it again. When I play WoW, I want to play my own class. I want to like do damage that way. I don't want to like, you know, completely shut this idea out, because I did honestly kind of enjoy the in Shadowlands, and I think it was called Necrotic Wake, the dungeon, where you had like different weapons, but there were different weapons, and I think that was interesting. And yeah, the spear, which was the one that like, you know, just nuked, it's kind of the same way here, but it was more, instead of like, you know, it was single target, so you had to be a little bit more precise of like when of what you use it on. And then there was also the hammers and the shield. There were other mechanics. I feel like if they want to do this weapon reround, they should go more like that, with you more options, more things where you need to be precise. This whole like click this button, you kill everything. It's just, in my opinion, boring. But besides that, you did have pretty big pulls, pretty nice. But there was a weird tempo thing again at this dungeon, right? You go back and forth, which again just never has worked for me, or I also think for anyone else really. Just this backpedaling and stuff like that. And then there's like, you know, as I mentioned, you pull really big, but then you go into this like travel time. And I'm not even talking about going from the mammoth all the way over to the other side. I'm also just talking about like going up the stairs, like the spiral stairs. Like that's like, what, 20-30 seconds when nothing is happening. And like, you know, there is just a fair bit of like movement in here, and it goes like really fast and then slow back down and up fast again. So there's a weird tempo in this dungeon, in my opinion. Now I actually do like the mammoth boss. I enjoy, again, this comes from like more of a tank point of view. I do enjoy manipulating the ground, or like, you know, making sure that like the being aware of like the spread of like the lava on the ground, so he doesn't stand in it, and like moving around a circle. And it feels great when you execute it in the right way. I think it's a nice boss. And then the Forgeman, I think, is a wonderful boss. Actually, it is one of the few Dragonflight bosses that I really like. And the thing that I like about the Forgeman is that's like, you know, perfecting the survivability challenge that some bosses like, you know, do. And with that, it's like, you don't really have like a DPS check in the way that like, you know, he spawns an ad and you have to like kill it in like, you know, like it's in 20 seconds, or else it's gonna get a cast off and it's gonna like be really bad. No, there's nothing like that. And he will do the same mechanics, the same really simple, just some swirlies, some raid damage, and then like a tank buster who would like do the same thing like over and over. And then they throwing the shield as well. I forgot about that. But yeah, what this boss challenges you on is using your defensives in a right pattern, and like, you know, also like with enough space in between them so you can have it up again for like the later fights. Like it really challenges that point, and I think that is a really fun, because I remember playing a mage on this before the rework, by the way, so we didn't have all those extra defensives. It was really like challenging, but also really thrilling and fun to like fight this boss. Like, you know, it was really like you or him going into it, right? Now the other two bosses, the chain guy and the last boss, I think I have the same criticism for them, and that's basically just that WoW needs to be better at telegraphing mechanics. And I think like WoW has gotten away with it for so long, but like at this point it's 2023, and this is not. It needs to be better. So my biggest like criticism here is that with the second boss, the chain boss, most people kind of quickly figure out that, oh, okay, I'm getting chained and I can break it. Like that is okay telegraph. Like I think it needs to be better telegraphed what is the actually real danger behind this, and that's like, you know, the dots or the pleats that you the burning effect, the debuff that you get on you whenever you break a chain, and which, you know, will stack. So if everyone breaks a chain immediately, then you'll have 3 stacks and you will die. It really, like, I don't have a good solution for this, like, necessarily. It's just like a number above your character's head will kind of just tell you something is going up, and it's not that it needs to deliberately tell you you can't break chains at the same like time, but it needs to like emphasize, you know, that like what is going on. I thought like as a DPS player, I thought this mechanic was. It took me so long to figure out like what is going on. What are we dying to? So like for some house would be teleport the same way the criticism I have for the last boss, sorry, which I think is it's a boss that I personally hate just because of like how broken it was when it came out. It did so incredibly much damage, and it was also really bugged. So you would just take damage without being anywhere near a swirly and just get a one shot. It was terrible. But there I also just think that you could have highlighted the gold much easier and much more brighter than it is right now. So yeah, like that, and again, you know, I kind of feel like that this dungeon would be better if you trimmed it a little bit and, you know, cut off the last boss. And then we have Brackenhide. Brackenhide is the one that everyone was so scared of going into this season, but I think it's quite like a fan favorite as well. At least I think it's my personal favorite of the Season 2 Dragonflight Dungeons. Really, really great start opening to this dungeon. You have this huge open area that you can just pick and choose from. Yeah, there is a certain way to go. Well, not like, there's like a certain way that most tanks go, but you actually have a lot of options to where you want, what you want to pull and how much you want to pull at a time. And yeah, every single tank's run of this goes just a tiny little bit different, which I think is a big plus. And then there's also just the fact that it's big and interesting pulls where you can actually play a little bit more aggressive, because there is, where you have a pack of 7, there might only be just 2 mobs that you need to focus on, meaning that you can, if you have that under control, if you can talk to someone in your group and be like, you need to make sure that this War Scourge doesn't get his fear off, you can actually pull another one in, because then you can take care of that one, and that is a really fun dynamic. Overall, I would say that the bosses are okay. on the scale. So the first boss is I should say the 3 amigos that are quite simple when you actually think about it. All you really have to do if you're not playing a healer, and that's the key note here, like the keyword here is that you're not playing a healer, all you have to deal with is the totem when that's coming, and then making sure that the healing of the it's not going off. You know, you make sure you interrupt that guy, the caster, and then, you know, use the defensive and everything. Besides that, there isn't really much going on to this fight, but I still like it. It's a free like person's cleave down, so you can get to pump some AoE in, which is always feels fun and great. But yeah, if you're playing a healer, this might be a huge struggle, and I think if that's a positive or negative thing, is mostly. I know this dungeon has been a really, like, specifically this boss has been a really like stress point because of like the tuning, and that if a DPS player didn't pump every single defensive into, you know, the fixate or just the bleed that will like come off, then, you know, the healer couldn't help them, like couldn't like save them, right? So it did require a lot from like you as a DPS player, or like to use defensive. But I do think that like it was a fun fight, and the same thing I can say for like the other bosses, that it's quite simple. I did like with the tree mouse that you got Eden, you can kind of like, you know, see how much damage or like how far can you push it. Usually I can like get Eden twice, and then I need someone. I haven't actually never been able to have a situation where someone needs to be Eden for a third time, but if it did happen, then, you know, I need someone else. And yeah, the hound boss, the one that with the crossbow, is easy, and it's nice. It's kind of like, you know, a little break, to be honest. It's a more of like I think a tank fight, because you need to make sure you have aggro, and you need to make sure that you don't die to the tank boss, which can hurt a bit. And then you have the last boss, which, you know, have the spiral going around. You need to kill the totem. Yeah, I think overall it's a good dungeon. It's not really any of the I wouldn't say any of the boss fights are like incredible or amazing, but they are definitely good. They're fine, absolutely. My biggest criticism of Brackenhide, which is besides the fact that it is a little bit longer, and I think that it could, maybe you could have cut off the crossroad boss. But there's like the key point to that, because you're probably not thinking about it ever, but you actually have a choice as soon as you kill the first boss, the first 3 bosses. You actually have a choice between going left or right. And you, in theory, have a choice, but in reality, everyone and their mom goes right. And there's like, at first the reason for this was mainly that the ads were easier on the right side, but they also gave more count, because all those small lashers, all those small like plant guys, they actually gave percentage, which they don't do anymore. But even after all those nerfs and nerfs to the other side, the mobs on the left side, people still don't go there. And it's so obvious to me that like what were Blizzard thinking? Like, honestly, you're choosing between going into a gauntlet where you're just continuously getting ads thrown your way, or going one way where you can actually just skip the whole, like, every mob's there and that pack. Like, that is such, and not only do you, like, at the end right there get a choice, but you can also, after Treemouth, skip that whole area going up to the third boss, which everyone does, but you can't do the other way around. So in reality, like, it might be foolish of me to assume the Blizzard are aware of like the different skips that people are going to come up with, because how could they? But there are really no reason to go left ever. It's such a huge like pressure point, like not pressure point, but like it's such a huge struggle to go that way when you can just go right and everything is easy. So I feel like the Brackenhide would have been so much better if it was just more open and more interesting in that regard. But this is what we got, and again, that's like my key point of like, they're like, it's just, you go right and like that's basically it. I wish there were more options, and I wish the Brackenhide was an even more open like route-wise dungeon than it is. Halls of Infusion is probably the best dungeon to like really hammer home the point here, is that there isn't really anything here that's like overly negative, or there isn't anything boss or mechanic or pack that I can like really point out and be like, okay, that's an issue right there, like that, I hate that. In the same way that they can't really pick out anything that I absolutely love about this dungeon either. I would say that it's one of the, I think it's the only dungeon that I actually feel like it deserves its length. I know that there's been talk about just removing the frog boss because it kind of also thematically doesn't really fit the whole vibe, but I actually really enjoy the frog boss because it's a little bit easier. So you actually get a little like break, because it can be an intensive dungeon. This like Halls of Infusion has been nerfed a little bit, which I think like puts it better, or makes it better. But yeah, it is also like, it has a quick tempo, even though it's a long dungeon. So this frog boss actually kind of like works as like just a little briefer, a little break. And then again, from a tank perspective, I do really enjoy it. After the frog boss, you have this like area with all the dragons, and the different patrolling packs, and you can kind of choose depending on how good your group is, and you analyze that throughout your run. You kind of can like choose how much you want to pull, which I personally really like, that control of the dungeon. But I have to say, like, everything else is kind of just not really that interesting, not really, okay, sure. I do like the third boss that, like, it's again one of those like survival fights where it's not, you like, if you just survive, you will just DPS her down. But because of like I do like that you have to like use out or like cycle out your different defensive abilities throughout the fight. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's okay, but I don't really like the intermission on the last boss, for example. I think that could have honestly just been cut off. But then when I thought about it, then the boss really doesn't have anything other interesting mechanics. So not really much there going on. I think Halls of Infusion is definitely one of the dungeons that are in Dragonflight. That's probably the nicest way I can say. And then finally, we have Uldaman. Uldaman is, of course, a rework of a dungeon that I personally really like. So it actually bothers me a little bit that I'm not feeling it. My biggest criticism of Uldaman is just that it's too long. It really did not need to be like 40 minutes almost. You could definitely have cut off a boss at somewhere. I get that there are some bosses that are just iconic, which is basically just the three dwarves, and I think that's fine to have them. But yeah, I really think that it could have been like, you know, trimmed a little bit. And then also just the fact that it kind of falls into a little bit of the same issue that some of the other dungeons does with, like, thematically, that it just looks very similar, and it looks very like all of it just kind of like feels the same and looks the same. You of course have the packs where, like, this Uldaman actually has a lot of damage, and I remember specifically in the first of the season where, like, it really just felt like you just getting absolutely smacked around. It was, at least before all the nerfs, was like a really dangerous dungeon. So long and dangerous, just really honestly, and also a dungeon that kind of looks samey the whole way through, is definitely a how do I say, like, yeah, it makes a tedious dungeon, you know. I do want to highlight this last boss though, because even though he's not my favorite, I can kind of respect him, because I really enjoy if someone makes a mistake. If you have a DPS player who dies, right? On the last boss in Uldaman, it's gonna make things difficult, because now all of a sudden you're gonna lose out, you know, the damage, right? It's gonna take longer to kill the boss, but him dying or making a mistake is not just inherently gonna wipe you as a party, which I can't stand on, like, other fights. You know, for example, with Neltharus on the chain boss, all it takes to wipe you as a group is just one person being, like, not noticing that you are on 2 stacks already of the debuff, and then going in, breaking their chains. That's one person mistake that just wipes the whole party, because you can actually survive 2 pretty easily, but the third one is the one that's, like, really gonna hurt. But so I do like the last boss, that it's like a difficult fight, but you can like, it doesn't just wipe you automatically that someone makes a mistake or someone dies. Like, it makes it harder, definitely, but it also makes it like you can overcome it, which I think is, like, really great. So yeah, that's basically my thoughts and opinions about the dungeons. Yeah, overall I think that they are okay. I don't really think that they are anything exceptional or anything huge. As I mentioned, it's kind of like there are good elements and bad elements, but, like, not really anything to drag me, like, one way or the other, which I honestly think is a little bit disappointing, that there isn't really any dungeons to just, like, really wow me away. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and, you know, stay tuned for the next couple of videos coming. Thank you.